I was standing near the ice sculpture when she found me. The reception was exactly as I'd expected. Loud, expensive, and superficial. It was my cousin Mark's big day. Mark, the family's eternal golden boy, was with his new girlfriend Chloe, a woman who wore her designer dress like armor. She swirled her champagne. "Mark said you were in the Navy?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "That must be so hard. Do you do admin? HR?" I kept my expression neutral. "Something like that. It was the family script. My job was a footnote." Chloe laughed and turned to the man beside her, her father, Mr. Jennings. "Oh wait," she giggled. "Mark said you were in naval design. So what, you do floral decor for ships?" The entire table chuckled. Mark looked away, embarrassed for me. I didn't look at Chloe. I looked past her, my eyes landing squarely on Mr. Jennings. "No," I said, my voice quiet but cutting through the noise. "I command them." The music seemed to fade. Mr. Jennings froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. He set it down, his demeanor shifting. "Command?" he asked, his voice suddenly serious. "As in?" I held his gaze. "Vice Admiral Carter." Chloe's laughter died instantly. Mark was completely pale. But that moment, it wasn't the beginning. It was the breaking point. The real insult had happened 3 weeks earlier. A panicked phone call. My Aunt Clara, Mark's mother and a woman who equated social status with oxygen, was on the other end. "Anna dear," she started, her voice tight with anxiety. "Mark's wedding is so important. We have very influential guests." I just listened, already knowing where this was going. "Chloe's father, Mr. Jennings, will be there." She rushed on. "He's a major defense CEO. Mark is trying to land a huge deal. And then, the request. We were hoping you wouldn't wear your uniform. It's so aggressive. And please don't talk about work. Just say you're in government logistics. We need this to go perfectly for Mark." She had no idea she wasn't just asking me to be small. She was asking a 3-star admiral to lie about her service to impress a defense contractor. A contractor who, incidentally, was already under procedural review by my office. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the 2 lives they forced me to live. To my family, I was just... It was the name they'd given me, a condescending little pat on the head that reduced my entire life's work into a quirky hobby. It was easier for them that way. It kept me in my box, small and non-threatening, while they all focused on the real star of the show, my cousin Mark. He was the one with the important job in finance, the one whose every minor achievement was cause for a family-wide celebration. I remember Christmas 2 years ago. Mark got a Rolex from his parents for landing a big promotion at some mid-level investment firm. The family gathered around, passing it back and forth, marveling at the weight of it. I received a novelty coffee mug. It was pink, and in bubbly letters, it said, "Girl Boss." They all laughed and said it was perfect for my little desk job. I just smiled and said thank you. I didn't mention I'd just spent the last 72 hours coordinating a multinational carrier group exercise in the South China Sea. At Thanksgiving, it was the same story. The entire dinner was spent dissecting the high-pressure world of Mark's stock portfolio. I made the mistake of trying to join in, mentioning I was working on a new maritime strategy for the Indo-Pacific. Aunt Clara just patted my hand, that same dismissive smile on her face. "That's nice, dear," she said, loud enough for the table to hear. "Like a travel agent for boats?" The table laughed. I just took a sip of my wine. My family saw a travel agent. But the next day, that travel agent was standing in a sterile, high-tech command center at Indo-Pacom. In that room, I wasn't Navy Anne. I was Vice Admiral Carter. I stood before a room of captains, commanders, and intelligence analysts, the weight of an entire ocean on my shoulders. "Listen up," I said, my voice cutting through the silent tension. The silent trident exercise is a go. I need full ISR convergence on these grid coordinates by 0400. The faces looking back at me were serious. They understood the stakes. We are testing carrier strike group interoperability and fleet level C5ISTAR. This isn't a drill, it's a message. The readiness of the 7th Fleet is my direct responsibility. I let that hang in the air for a beat. There is no margin for error. A face flickered to life on the main video screen. It was General Peterson, a 4-star Air Force general who served as my counterpart. He wasn't a man who wasted words, and he certainly didn't care about girl boss mugs. Admiral Carter's analysis is ironclad, he stated to the room. You have your orders. Execute as planned. There were no novelty mugs here. There was only the mission and the quiet, bone-deep respect of people who understood the burden of command. Hours later, I was in the back of my secure vehicle, the briefing finally over. The city lights blurred past the window as I reviewed classified documents on a secure tablet, documents that determined the movement of thousands of personnel. My personal phone, the Navy Ann phone, buzzed on the seat next to me. It felt like an intrusion from another, smaller, pettier world. I picked it up. The message glowed in the darkness. Hey Ann, Mom told you about the no uniform thing, right? Seriously, don't make it weird. Chloe's dad is a big deal. I read the words. Don't make it weird. I thought about the men and women I'd just given orders to, the ships moving. Into position, the absolute gravity of what a big deal actually meant. Chloe's dad was a contractor. I was the client. A cold, familiar anger settled in my stomach. I took a deep breath, my face a mask of stone. My fingers typed one word, acknowledged. I put the phone down, turned it face down on the seat, and went back to the tactical display on my tablet. For years, I had held the line. I compartmentalized. Navy Ann for the family, Admiral Carter for the nation, but their request, this time, wasn't just an insult. By asking me to mislead a defense contractor, they were creating a potential security breach. They had crossed a line. So I decided it was time to show them exactly where that line was drawn. After that text from Mark, the familiar, tired anger evaporated. It was replaced by something else, a cold, quiet precision. For years, I had tried to explain my life to them. I had tried to share my world, but they were incapable of listening. They only respected what they could see: money, superficial status, and the narrow definition of power they understood. Trying to tell them I was a vice admiral was pointless. They couldn't, or wouldn't, comprehend it. A new strategy solidified in my mind. I would no longer tell them. I would show them, and the wedding, their chosen stage, was the perfect venue. I didn't get emotional. I got to work. Back in my office, I logged into the secure naval database and opened the contractor files. I typed Jennings Aerospace. My aunt had no idea how right she was. Mr. Jennings was indeed a major defense partner. As I scrolled through active contracts, one file code caught my eye. Project Neptune. It was a massive, multi-year logistics contract, and more importantly, it was currently pending a mandatory performance review. A review that my office, and ultimately I, would have final sign-off on. Mark wasn't the only one trying to close a deal. I buzzed my aide. Lieutenant Commander Evans, my sharp, professional right hand, entered my office. Evans, I said, my eyes still on the screen. I will be attending a social event this weekend. Mr. Jennings of Jennings Aerospace will be present. He immediately understood the subtext. I want a full briefing on Project Neptune prepared for me by Friday, and you will accompany me to the event. I finally looked up. Full service dress uniform. Will be attending on official representational duties. A brief, knowing smile flickered across Evans's face. He'd fielded my family's dismissive calls before. Understood, Admiral. When the day of the wedding arrived, I followed my aunt's request to the letter. I didn't wear my uniform. I chose a simple, elegant civilian dress. I saw the moment Aunt Clara spotted me, the wave of visible relief, the little nod of approval, the look you give a difficult child who has finally decided to behave. She saw Navy Ann, the harmless relative with the quirky boat hobby, safely neutralized. Mark and Chloe were holding court, and I just faded into the background, letting them feel comfortable in their power. My aunt was so relieved I'd listened. She thought I had complied. She didn't understand. In my world, compliance is a strategy. The trap was set. The bait was me. All I had to do was wait for them to walk into it. We were back at the table. Chloe had just delivered her punchline, and the little circle of family friends giggled. So what, you do floral decor for ships? I felt the familiar, hot sting of humiliation, the expectation that I would just absorb it. That I would be Navy Ann and laugh it off to keep the peace. But this time was different. The plan was in motion. I took a slow breath, letting the silence hang for just a beat too long. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at Mark, who I could feel cringing beside me. I looked directly at her father, Mr. Jennings. No, I said, my voice perfectly level, quiet, but cutting straight through the clinking glasses and the distant music. I command them. The music from the dance floor seemed to fade. Chloe's laugh was still frozen on her face, but her eyes were darting between me and her father, sensing she'd made a terrible mistake. Mr. Jennings, his reaction was everything. The blood drained from his face. His expensive fork, loaded with salmon, stopped. He stared at me, his eyes wide, running a frantic calculation. He wasn't seeing Navy Ann. He was seeing something else, a ghost at the table. He finally spoke, and his voice was a low, serious rumble. Command? As in, I just held his gaze. I didn't need to raise my voice. I gave him a single, sharp nod. Vice Admiral Carter. The fork clattered onto his plate, spraying sauce on the white linen. It was the loudest sound in the world. Mr. Jennings shot to his feet. He was an older, heavy-set man, but he snapped to a rigid, almost painful posture, of attention so fast his chair screeched backward on the polished floor. Chloe's face was a mask of sheer, uncomprehending horror. Mark looked like he'd been slapped, and Aunt Clara, her painted-on smile was frozen, her eyes wide, just blank. Admiral, Jennings stammered, his hands stiff at his sides. Admiral Carter. My apologies. I didn't recognize you in civilian attire. I finally allowed myself a small, cold smile. I turned my head, just slightly, to look at my aunt. No need, Mr. Jennings. I was undercover. My family prefers it. Aunt Clara's face went from white to a blotchy, sick red. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Mark just kept shaking his head, whispering, "No, no, no," as if he could rewind the last 30 seconds. But before anyone in my family could find their voice, a new figure sliced through the crowd. Right on cue. Lieutenant Commander Evans, immaculate in his full-service dress whites, moved with purpose. He held a locked, official briefcase in his left hand. He ignored the bride, the groom, the dance floor, and all of Aunt Clara's important guests. He walked directly to our table and stopped 2 feet behind my chair. He saluted Mr. Jennings first, as was protocol, then me. "Admiral," Evans said, his voice crisp and formal, easily carrying over the now muted party. "Sorry to interrupt. You have a secure call with Seknav's office at 2100 regarding Project Neptune, and I have the preliminary review you requested." The entire table was silent. The important guests Aunt Clara had been trying to impress all night were all staring, their expressions a mix of shock and dawning comprehension. They knew exactly what a vice admiral was. They knew what a secure call with the Secretary of the Navy's office meant. And they were all watching Mr. Jennings, a powerful CEO, stand at attention like a chided schoolboy. Mr. Jennings was visibly sweating now, his eyes locked on the briefcase. "Admiral," he said, his voice strained. "Project Neptune, of course. Is there an issue?" He was asking as a CEO. He was begging as a contractor. This was the moment. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, letting him wait. I set the glass down. "There might be, Mr. Jennings," I said, my tone shifting to the one I used in the command center. "My office has serious concerns about the performance metrics and the last set of deliverables." I leaned in, just a fraction. "Frankly, the numbers are unacceptable, but I'm sure your team can address them. If you're still the right contractor for the job." It wasn't just a reveal. It was a direct, professional, procedural execution, delivered in front of everyone. Mark finally found his voice. It was a pathetic, cracked whisper. "Anna, Vice, Admiral? What is going on?" I turned to my cousin. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Navy Ann. I wasn't the weird, quiet relative. I was the one holding all the cards. "Mark," I said, my voice flat, "Mr. Jennings and I are discussing official United States Navy business. Business that you are not read in on. Please do not interrupt again." Then, I turned my gaze to Chloe. She looked physically ill. And Chloe, a word of professional advice. Her eyes widened. "Before you mock someone's girly job at a party again, you should make damn sure she doesn't control your father's billion-dollar defense contracts." My aunt looked like she was going to faint. Chloe was sheet white. My aide pulled out a chair for me. Mr. Jennings sat down, his face grim. In the middle of my cousin's perfect reception, a formal naval review had just begun. And for the first time in my life, my family was speechless. The party went on, but the universe of that room had fundamentally shifted. The music, the laughter, the sound of champagne glasses. It all just faded into a dull, distant roar. Lieutenant Commander Evans had pulled out a chair for me, and Mr. Jennings, his face pale but now intensely focused, sat down. We were in a bubble. Evans opened a locked binder, and just like that, in the middle of my cousin's opulent reception, we began to talk. We discussed C-5ISTAR interoperability, logistics chains, and the unacceptable performance metrics of Project Neptune. It was a technical, cold, and brutally precise conversation. It was the language of my real world, the one my family had never even bothered to ask about. I glanced up only once. Across the room, I saw them. My family, Mark, Chloe, and Aunt Clara. They were huddled together by the towering 6-tier wedding cake, a small, isolated island of humiliation. The important guests Aunt Clara had been so desperate to impress were all keeping their distance. They were shooting discreet, curious glances at our table, at me, at my aide in his full dress, uniform, and at the powerful CEO who was now leaning in, listening with deferential intensity. For the first time in their lives, my family were the ones on the outside. They were the ones who didn't belong, staring into a world of real power that they couldn't access. After 20 minutes of rapid-fire technical questions and increasingly desperate assurances from Jennings, I closed the binder. Evans stood at parade rest behind me. Mr. Jennings, a man who had walked into that reception as a titan of industry, looked profoundly humbled. "Admiral," he said, his voice low and earnest, all trace of his earlier swagger gone. "You have my personal assurance. The metrics will be fixed by close of business next quarter." He paused, his gaze flickering to his daughter, who was staring blankly at the tablecloth. "And my deepest apologies for my and my daughter's assumptions." I didn't smile. I just gave him a single, professional nod. See that you do, Mr. Jennings. 1 year later, I was standing at another podium. This wasn't a wedding. There were no ice sculptures, no superficial chatter, no relatives whispering for me to not make it weird. I was at Naval Base San Diego. The sun was hot on the tarmac, and the air was sharp with sea salt and jet fuel. I was in my immaculate full-dress white uniform, the gold braid on my hat gleaming, formally accepting command of a new prestigious joint task force. The front row wasn't filled with people who shared my bloodline. It was filled with people who shared my values. I looked out and saw General Peterson, who gave me a curt, proud nod. I saw admirals, generals, and foreign dignitaries, and as the applause rang out, it wasn't the polite, obligated clap of a family function. It was the sharp, unified, thunderous respect of thousands of sailors and Marines standing in perfect formation. This, I thought to myself, this was my real family. This was the one I had earned. A family built not on blood and obligation, but on mutual competence, shared sacrifice, and absolute respect. My new office was expansive, overlooking the harbor and the massive carriers that rested there. It was quiet. My new aide came in one afternoon. "Ma'am," he said, handing me a thick, cream-colored envelope. This arrived in the diplomatic pouch. "It's not official." I recognized the Jennings Aerospace logo. Inside was a formal typed letter from Mr. Jennings himself. It was a concise thank you. Project Neptune had passed its subsequent review with flying colors. The new metrics were exceeding all expectations, and he credited my direct and clarifying oversight for the complete turnaround. It was professional, and I appreciated it. But tucked inside, folded in half, was a smaller, handwritten note card. It read, "P.S. I thought you might like to know. Chloe is no longer with Mark. She's now working as an unpaid intern at a nonprofit. She is learning a great deal." I read that last line twice. She is learning a great deal. It wasn't just an apology. It was an acknowledgement, a sign of ultimate respect. I put the note down, quietly satisfied. A few months after that, as the holidays approached, my personal phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. I stared at the screen, a strange, detached feeling washing over me. All the years of anger, the familiar sting of being invisible, the hot shame. It was all gone. It had been replaced by a simple, cold calm. The message read, "Hey Anne, are you coming for Christmas? Mom, we get it now, we're proud of you." I read the words, "We get it now, we're proud of you." I thought about how, 5 years ago, those words would have been everything. I would have cried. I would have finally felt seen. But now? I looked at the text and I felt nothing. Not triumph. Not anger. Tired. My worth was no longer in their hands. My pride wasn't something they could grant me like a favor. I looked up from the phone at a framed photograph on my desk. It wasn't a family photo. It was a picture of me on the bridge of a carrier, surrounded by my command team. My real team. I tapped the screen, archived the message without a reply, and turned back to watch the ships in my harbor. I had work to do. My family wanted me to be Navy Anne, the quiet girl with the hobby. They couldn't handle Vice Admiral Carter, the woman with the authority. They learned that day that rank isn't just a title, it's a responsibility, and I will never put it aside to make someone else feel comfortable again. They mistook my silence for weakness, but in my world, silence means a plan is in motion. If you've ever had to use your professional power to draw a personal boundary, share your story below. In this community, we salute your rank.